And now on the line is Steve Bradley from Into the West. Into the West are the rail lobby group for the northwest of Ireland, and Steve is no stranger to this programme on Near FM. Steve, welcome back to Near FM.
Hi, Darren. Good to chat again.
Alright, cool. Steve, we last spoke on Near FM nearly 6 months ago. This is a big question, Steve, but can you remind our listeners as to what the All Ireland Strategic Rail Review and the Rail Prioritisation Strategy are, and take us up to what the latest news is with them, please?
Yeah, so the All Ireland Strategic Rail Review was published in 2024. It's a document that looks at the existing rail network north and south and comes up with 32 different recommendations for how it should, in the views of the consultants behind that strategy, how it should be improved. If you look at the map of rail on the island of Ireland, you'll notice in particular a huge hole in the northwest corner. We call it the gap in the map. So that was kind of one of the things which inspired the creation of this rail strategy in the first place. The fact that any credible look at the rail map will cause anybody to think, okay, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't look right. Something should be done about it. So that was kind of part of the inspiration behind it. When it was published in summer of 2024, as mentioned, it had 32 recommendations in there, and it covered things right across the island. Some things we expected would be in there, and some things which were a bit of a surprise. The idea of linking rail from Armagh through Monaghan all the way down to Mullingar was a real surprise. For example, things which we expected to be in there were things like reopening the railway line between Derry and Portadown, because we knew that had already been assessed by Translink in the north, and they estimated that about 3 million people would use that railway line a year, which would instantly make it, an extremely popular railway line by Irish standards. So, as mentioned, those 32 recommendations were published in the document in summer 2024. And what they've done since then is, again, that the transport people north and south have been away looking at what they think should be their priorities within those 32 recommendations. And that's what they came back with last month in December, when they launched what's called the Rail Prioritisation Strategy. And it's a number of things, again, north and south, which they think, okay, we've looked at the All-Ireland Rail Strategy. These are the things which we think are the most urgent and the ones which we think are the strongest proposals. And in terms of the gap in the map, what they're proposing should happen in the northwestern corner of the island. Some good news in there. In fact, they're proposing to reopen rail between Derry and Portadown. But we also have some concerns about the balance of what's in there for the northern half of the island, and what it means in terms of, moving forwards, addressing what is a chronic imbalance east and west.
Yeah, I'll ask you now in a minute about the imbalance between East and West, even within Northern Ireland. But, am I right in saying that even if Derry and Portadown reopens, it's not going to happen for a long time, will it not, Steve?
Yeah, so the plan is to reopen Derry Portadown and also Derry to Letterkenny. So you'll have what we call the Northwest Rail Corridor, going all the way from Donegal down through Tyrone and Derry to the border and then on to Dublin. So the good news is it would finally connect the northwest of the island to Dublin, and that includes two counties of Donaghrail, which is Tyrone and Donegal. The problem is, it's quite a big project. It's about 65 miles of twin track rail. It's big infrastructure, and big infrastructure takes a big period of time and a big sum of money. There's no way around that. Their proposal is to start that project roughly in about 20 years from now, so you're talking 2045 or so. But most of that work is in the north, and the north has a very poor record in delivering infrastructure, and certainly big infrastructure. Big infrastructure, it just can't make progress. We have the A5 road, which has just been mired in legal challenges and bureaucratic mess-ups. We have even Casement Park. It's just stuck in limbo because everybody's arguing over the process and the funding and everything else. So there's not a good record in the north of delivering these things. So I would be stunned if they do actually manage to hit that timescale of 2045 for this project. What's more likely to happen, in our view, is it'll be delivered in the second half of this century, so 25 years or more from now. And that creates a number of problems. Firstly, the other improvements they're proposing for the northern half of the island will happen first. So this east-west imbalance in rail provision will just get worse before it gets better. And secondly, for Donegal, Donegal's real hopes are effectively hinging here upon the ability of Stormont to get around to reopening the Derry Portadown route. And as mentioned, if that doesn't happen anytime soon, and if it's marred in delays and everything else, it just means that a part of the Republic, a part of the South in Donegal, is stuck in limbo whilst it waits for the North to get round to delivering something. So we've been arguing that the Southern government has the money. It also has the opportunity with the EU. We have the Shared Island Fund providing money for cross-border projects. We're really pushing for them to get on and do Donegal to Derry first and not wait for this other Derry Portadown line to be opened, because otherwise, it's unwise for Donegal's real hopes to hinge upon Stormont, which we know has a poor record of delivery and never seems to have enough money to do anything.
Because if Letterkenny is linked to Derry, it would be connected to Belfast as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but also there's the statistical office in Dublin has produced a heat map of cross-border activity. So basically, people who cross the border every day for work, study, or training. You would probably expect that most of those journeys would happen in the Eastern Corridor, along the route between Belfast, Newry, Dundalk, and Dublin, because that's where most of the island lives. But it isn't. Half of all cross-border journeys along the entire 96 odd miles of the border happen between Derry and Donegal. And that's no surprise to anybody who knows Derry and lives in Derry, because there is no border where we are. I mean, people are crossing the border multiple times a day to buy petrol, to nip the post offices, to drop kids at school. The border doesn't exist where we are, and there's a huge amount of journeys. So it's not just about connecting Letterkenny to Belfast. It's the fact that you have half of all cross-border journeys on the entire island are happening right in the top corner, the northwest corner between Derry and Donegal. And at the moment, realistically, almost none of those are happening by public transport. And anybody who knows Letterkenny is a small town of about 22,000 people, but it has appalling traffic. It is worse traffic than somewhere like Dundalk or Drogheda, which is pretty much 3 times its size. And that's why it's really important to give people an alternative way to get in and out of Letterkenny and to get it across the border, because we know that they're doing those journeys, so they can do them without having to resort to car, because at the moment that's what the vast majority of them feel is their only choice. And at the moment, Letterkenny is the 3rd largest town in the Republic that doesn't have rail. The 2 bigger ones in it are Swords, which is included in the Metrolink proposal, and Navan, which is going to get rail back as part of the extension of the M3 sort of rail corridor up as well. And those 2 things are supposed to happen in roughly the next decade. So Letterkenny will be, within a very foreseeable future, will be the largest town in the Republic without rail, on top of its terrible traffic, and on top of the fact that it's a very vibrant cross-border travel area. So, yes, great to have Letterkenny connect up to Belfast and to Coleraine. There's a university in Coleraine, there's 2 in Belfast, there's 1 in Derry. But it's also about these cross-border journeys which are happening every day for lots of purposes, and giving people a different, alternative way to do those journeys rather than feeling they have to drive.
Alright, Steve, are you in any way kind of optimistic that you'd be able to persuade? I understand that Jack Chambers is the Minister for Infrastructure in the Republic of Ireland. Are you in any way optimistic that you're able to get him to change his mind to start work on the Letterkenny to Derry line anytime soon?
It doesn't seem to be on the government's radar in the South at the moment. They don't really seem to view it as a necessity or a priority. So we've a bit of work to be done on the persuasion aspect of that, which we'll continue to do. We also need to focus on the Shared Island Fund. The first stage to get the boulder rolling on reopening rail between Derry and Letterkenny is a feasibility study. That will look at likely passenger numbers, potential routes. Routes are really important. There's planning permission being granted every month for projects around Letterkenny and around Derry. There's a new cemetery being built on the edge of Derry near the Letterkenny Road. I don't think it would be in the route of where the rail would need to go, but the topography is challenging. There's a lot of hills around there, and rail doesn't like hills. So you could find that there's only a small number of corridors that rail could go between Derry and Letterkenny. And, God forbid if that a cemetery has been built in the middle of it, but we just don't know until they pick the route. We don't know where it needs to go, and therefore councils don't know what they need to keep clear. They're continually building new housing and other things around Letterkenny, and that will make it increasingly difficult to get rail right into the town, because there's no point having a rail station for a small town which is right on the edge, and people think, sure, that's a hassle to go and use it. I may as well just keep driving by the time I drive to the station. So there's work to be done in terms of getting that feasibility study moving, so the councils know what they need to protect and everything else. But yeah, we've campaigning work to do this year with various people in the south, including ministers, but also the Shared Island Fund, and we'll just keep making that case for rail to come back to Donegal and for it to happen sooner, because for all the reasons I've mentioned, it's a fantastic project. It will be very transformative for Donegal, and there's real dangers that if work doesn't start in this soon, it will just make the project more expensive and harder when it does eventually start.
And it could even make it impossible, could it?
I don't think it'll make it impossible, but it could make it suboptimal. If you look at Newry's railway station is at least a mile outside the town. It's really in Bessbrook. It's the old railway station for Bessbrook. But if you speak to anybody about the station in Newry, it doesn't feel like it's Newry station. It feels very distant. And that's the problem when you're bringing rail back to these towns, whether it be Letterkenny, Omagh, Strabane, wherever. They've changed. It was the 50s that Letterkenny lost its rail. It was the 60s for Omagh. They've had stuff built on the old routes. So, you really need to bring rail as close to the centre as you can, so it feels really accessible and usable for people. And not doing that, it's just another barrier to people using it. So not impossible. You can always have a railway station, somewhere as close to Letterkenny as you can, but you really want to be able to get it right into the town if at all possible. So a challenge we have in the north of the border at the moment is there's a huge east-west imbalance, and that's reflected on the map of the island, this gap in the map that we talk about. At the moment, there are 54 railway stations in Northern Ireland. 53 are in the east of the Bann, which is the traditional dividing line between east and west of Northern Ireland, certainly in the northern part of that, and 3 are in the west. So 51 in the east, 3 in the west. The proposals within the rail prioritisation strategy will add more new stations to the east before they get round to adding any in the west. So it'll be roughly 62 in the stations in the east before they get round to adding any more in the west. And on top of that, they proposed adding only 3 new stations in the west. That would be Strabane, Omagh and Dungannon, but adding at least 8 in the east. So at the end of this whole process, it's brilliant that without Derry Portadown railway line reopens, there would be a new railway line in the west. It would cover County Tyrone for the first time in 60 years, and it would enable Donegal to get rail back for the first time in 60 years. But it will actually make east-west imbalance even worse by adding more stations to the east than it does to the west. And we think that's a real problem. We need other projects to happen in the west and for them to be prioritised, because otherwise there's no point spending a vast sum of money to just make this increasing imbalance geographically in rail provision even worse.
And I find that unbelievable, the imbalance, and it could be even getting worse, like it could get worse in the future. Steve, just before you go, the catchment area for Near FM is northeast Dublin. Can you tell our listeners on Near FM from Dublin what they can do to help you? I imagine that you're calling for people to lobby the local TDs, including Minister Jack Chambers, eh?
Yeah, we'd be looking for people to lobby politicians. Part of it is just to start talking about this stuff. Let's make the idea of better rail on the island and in the northwest corner of the island specifically, let's make this a talking point. It'd be great that people in Dublin were saying, I want to go up to Donegal for the weekend. How do I get there? I can't do it by rail. I have to drive, it's poor roads and long journeys. If that's not acceptable, we should have a better way to get around this island. There'll be lots of people in, Dublin and the northern part of Dublin with relations in Donegal. There'll be people from the county, there'll be people with family up there. And it's important that they start talking about, we need to improve this whole situation. How do you get up to that northwest corner of the island, which has got fantastic scenery, lots of great places to go. It's got universities. We've got ATU in Letterkenny and in Killybegs. We've got also university in Derry. There's lots of reasons for people to come up to the northwest, but at the moment we effectively leave them with certainly the main and possibly the only way of doing that is by driving. Great if you have a car, great if you drive, but what if you don't? About a quarter of all households in the north don't have access to a vehicle. We know that even in Donegal, I think it's roughly about 1 in every 6 people, 1 in every 7 people don't have access to a vehicle. So how do they get around? Because the buses are terrible in Donegal. So that's why it's important for people in Dublin to not just to think, actually, that's a problem for somebody else and somewhere else that I don't really know. This will help people in Dublin. The better public transport is anywhere outside of Dublin also just makes that, cheaper housing more accessible. There's no reason why you couldn't live in Donegal and commute down, say 2 days a week to Dublin for work and work from home the rest of the time. And life is good in Donegal, the schools are great, and houses are a hell of a lot cheaper. And it is, once you have a fast railway service, which would get you down that corridor, there's no reason why people couldn't base themselves in places like Donegal or even Tyrone and places like that, and then commute down to Dublin, a few times a month for work. So there's lots of reasons why it would be in the interest of people in Dublin. And also, it just means the northwest of the island can make its full contribution to the economy. And that's good for everybody on the island. There's no point having one corner of the island which underdelivers and underperforms, because that just drags it down for everybody else. It means there's less tax money. It means there needs to be more social security money. Let's give the northwest of the island the things it needs to thrive and prosper and deliver on its potential and do what it can to make the entire island, better, more prosperous, and better functioning than it is currently.
Yeah, and it's no fault of the people of Donegal that there's regional imbalance in Ireland, and a lot of people in Donegal are very angry with consecutive governments in the Republic of Ireland. One of the kind of names for Donegal is the Forgotten County, isn't it?
Very much so. I mean, if you look at the map of Donegal, Donegal is effectively cut off by Northern Ireland. There's a couple of miles of connectivity between Donegal and Leitrim in the south of the county, and apart from that, it's almost like an island separated away from the rest of the Republic. And it suffered greatly from partition. That's not a political point, that's just a straightforward point of fact. And the reason why places like Donegal lost a railway was because it got scrapped in the north, and that just left bits of rail isolated in Donegal and cut them off from their hinterland, and meant it no longer made sense to keep them. So some of this is about just reversing the wrongs of the past and giving Donegal the things it needs to just work better as a county and to no longer be forgotten. There's no point having 25 counties in the south which feel like they get the focus and attention they need, and leaving Donegal continually as the one which is the Cinderella and never gets what it needs. Let's do fair by Donegal and help the whole island as a result.